Be seated. Paul's our tech guy here, and he's done his little miracles here, and we've got it back up on the big screen. How long it's going to last, I don't know. Okay? Doctor, you're still under oath? You may proceed.
Dr. Roth, the reason that you met with the prosecutor multiple times and also with the media multiple times was because, in fact, you were aware that it was your position, that your position would be strengthened by indictments, correct?
No, it's not my understanding.
You're aware that that's what the thought process was behind Project Lighthouse, correct?
No.
Sir, I'm now showing you what's been Defense Exhibit MCD 11. That is a draft communications from plan and playbook from Project Lighthouse. Do you see that, sir?
I can.
Okay. And for the record, that's MCD.
Is it on your screen right there?
11?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So right here, it gives you background and objectives. That's the first part of it, correct?
That's correct.
And then the strategy, right?
Correct.
Okay, on page 2 of the strategy, it says, while our position would be strengthened by an indictment, or S, our argument must be able to stand on its own regardless of what the county prosecutor does. You see that there, sir?
I do.
But yet it's your testimony that that was not your goal, correct?
Correct.
In addition, one of the strategies that you had was our messaging must appeal to the heart as well as the mind. The messaging from the doctor and nurses and pharmacists, who we have called the villains, will likely be heavy on emotion. Quote, we were just trying to alleviate acute suffering in the patient's last few minutes of life. Our emotional argument must be stronger. That was the strategy behind Project Lighthouse, was it not, sir?
That's what that document says at that point in time, yes.
But of course, that's not what your testimony is, right?
My testimony is that
You were just trying to be transparent, Your Honor.
Okay, you can finish the answer. Is that your testimony?
yes.
That you were just trying to be transparent, right?
Yes.
Is that a yes? Now, you testified under direct examination that the only reason you hired a criminal defense lawyer to make this connection with the county prosecutor was because you guys were unfamiliar with how the criminal justice system works, right?
That was the main reason, that's right.
Okay. And you testified under direct examination when asked, I want to make sure I get the right word that you used. Dr. Roth, you know they say young eyes are better than the old ones, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Back to my last set of questions. I'm again showing you the MCD 11, which is the plan and playbook for Project Lighthouse. On the last page, it says key audiences and spokespersons. And then it gives a list of people internally who you want to be the audience, right?
That we would need to communicate with, yes.
And then you have the external people, right?
Correct.
And that includes elected officials?
Correct.
Like the prosecutor, the county prosecutor is an elected official?
He is. I don't know if that was specifically the reference for that.
Okay. And then you have your media, local, national, trades. You see that?
Correct.
And then it lists here who the key spokespeople will be. Right?
Correct.
And on there it gives Mount Carmel, starts with Ed.
Yes.
Right? And under Trinity Health, who's the first person listed?
My name. I am.
So when you testified a minute ago that it wasn't your plan, it's just what the document says, that's not what the document says, correct?
Well, the document that was at a point in time on December 19th when I met with, say, the dispatch, that was 4 weeks later.
So you had a change in strategy that indictments would not strengthen your position. Is that what your testimony is, sir?
To my knowledge, that is correct. That was not our primary purpose. Our primary purpose was to communicate what had happened.
But yet, it was you who met with the county prosecutors once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times. Correct?
Correct.
And in these 5 meetings, the first meeting you went to on the 17th, it was just you, the general counsel for Mount Carmel, and the vice president of planning and strategy, right?
That from a Trinity Health and Mount Carmel perspective, at the December meeting?
Yes.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
So basically, it's you, a lawyer for Mount Carmel, and the press person for Mount Carmel, right?
And I believe Greg Peterson was there as well.
The criminal defense lawyer.
Yes.
So there's nobody there from Mount Carmel who was actually at the bedside or supervising those at the bedside to give facts to the prosecutors, right?
That would have happened through other channels.
My question to you is, there was nobody there who was at the bedside or who supervised those at the bedside that could give them facts, right?
Not at those meetings.
So then, the second meeting, it's you, again, criminal defense lawyer, you and 2 lawyers, right?
Correct.
Not even anybody from Mount Carmel, right? Except the lawyer.
Correct.
Then the third time, it's just you and the lawyer, right?
The third, can you give me the date for the third time, please?
February 5th.
Yeah, same group of people.
Okay. And you said that you don't recall February 7th, so that I won't ask you about. But the next time, on March 11th, it's just you and the prosecutor, correct?
No, I believe the same group of people were at each of these meetings, or at least those meetings.
So you and the lawyers.
Correct.
Again, nobody from the bedside or who supervised those at bedside that can give them facts, right?
Not within these meetings, that's correct.
And that's because your position would be strengthened with an indictment, right?
That is not the purpose for those meetings, no, sir.
This was all before Dr. Husel got indicted, that you met with the prosecutor, right?
Those meetings were before Dr. Husel was indicted, that's correct.
Now, while we're talking about lawyers, was your testimony in direct that you hired a lawyer, Greg Slimmer? Did I get that name right?
Mount Carmel did, that's correct.
Okay. For all the nurses and pharmacists, right?
Yes.
Okay. Despite the fact that that's one lawyer representing a potential conflict of interest of having all of these lawyers, all of these
Strike
nurses and
that.
pharmacists?
Ladies and gentlemen, disregard the question. Let's ask a proper question.
Sir, you're aware that one lawyer can't represent all of these nurses and pharmacists, right?
I'm not aware of how many a lawyer can represent or not represent.
And you're aware, or are you aware, sir, that this lawyer never attended a single interview by the detectives with his or her, his prospective client, or his actual client?
I am not aware of that.
So one lawyer representing all of these nurses and pharmacists didn't sit in for one single meeting with the detectives. Are you aware of that at all?
I said, no, I'm not aware.
And you stated that one of the reasons under direct, you were asked by the prosecutor as to whether it was a concern whether a hospital or his administrators would be charged with a crime. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Generally speaking, yeah.
Okay. And you stated that it wasn't a prominent concern, correct?
Correct.
But it was a concern, was it not?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, it was a concern because you're aware that there have been numerous hospitals and administrators who have been charged with their failure to control opioids. Isn't that a fact, sir?
No, and I'm not aware of a parallel case.
No, I'm not talking about a parallel case. What I'm asking you, sir, is you're aware that there was a major crackdown on hospitals and administrators as to their controlled substances.
Nationally speaking, yeah, that's right.
And that's something in your position that you have to be we're concerned about, right?
Yes.
And you're so concerned, sir, that you, in fact, have not one, but two lawyers who escorted you here today. Right?
Okay.
Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
Sir, you've retained your own criminal defense counsel, have you not?
Yes, I have.
Objection, Your Honor.
How's it relevant? He has the right to counsel. Everybody has the right to counsel in the United
Yes, because
States.
it's an obvious concern of potential criminal charges.
Okay.
Lay outside of the jurisdiction.
No, we're done. Sustained. Next question. Disregard the last question in the conversation.
Sir, you stated under direct examination that you recall the line of questionings about Katie Barga not being a clinician. Do you remember that?
I remember asking whether she was or wasn't, being asked whether she wasn't a clinician. That's correct.
Katie Barga didn't conduct this root cause analysis investigation by herself, right?
Correct.
There, in fact, was a team of medical professionals that were involved in this, correct?
Correct.
Including yourself.
No, I was not directly involved in that.
You didn't supervise it or were a part of it in any way, shape, or form?
I reviewed it after it was completed.
And you were aware that palliative care specialists were also involved?
Correct.
Now, sir, you also testified about your self-reporting to all the numerous agencies. You remember that?
I do.
And your testimony is, again, that you were trying to be transparent, correct?
Correct.
And part of that transparency was self-reporting to CMS, right?
I believe so, yes.
Sir, you know that you were contractually obligated to report to CMS under the ACO. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
So it wasn't because you were trying to be transparent and a good guy. You had to report to CMS. Otherwise, you would have been in violation of that contract with CMS, correct? Oh, excuse me, with ACO.
Yeah, because specifically this is about the ACO, not about, on direct, it was around Mount Carmel's participation with CMS. Those are two separate issues.
And you had to report to them.
With regard to the ACO, yes, sir.
And what is the ACO for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury? What does that mean?
So the ACO is a relationship that Trinity Health enters into with Medicare to be accountable for the quality, cost, and experience of patients who have Medicare across Trinity Health.
Judge, if I could have a moment, I want to see if I have anything further. I have no further questions.
Mr. Zion?
Give me a minute.
I see NC people, please.
Give me a second.
NCD 11.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. Do you recall Mr. Jose Baez a moment ago referring to what they've labeled as NCD 11 and him quoting, I believe it was this first part, our messaging must appeal to the heart as well as to the mind. Was that what he was referring to when he was quoting from this? Or was it on a different page?
I believe it was that section.
This
is the section. The messaging from the doctor, nurses, and pharmacists, as he's quoting it, he said, who we will call the villains. Is that in there? Is that actually in there?
It is not.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about this villains document. Did that plan get implemented?
It did not.
When did that plan change?
To the best of my recollection, it was around between the week prior to and the week after Christmas of 2018 and early into 2019.
And is that the time you were taking over this investigation and this crisis?
I was more directly involved, that's correct.
I'm sorry. I didn't hear your answer.
Someone coughed in the back.
Yep, I was more directly involved, that's correct.
And was it your specific intention to not go that way and go a different way?
That is correct.
And what way did you believe was the appropriate way to handle this situation?
To inform the families what had occurred and what we were doing to investigate it and to share that publicly at the right time.
And as you testified, other public agencies?
Other agencies, yes, that's correct.
And did that include the county prosecutor's office?
It did.
And did you dictate to the county prosecutor how they were going to conduct their investigation?
I'll permit it's transitional. You heard the question?
I did, Your Honor.
Okay.
I did not.
Did you dictate to the homicide detectives how they would conduct their investigations?
I did not.
Did you defer to the county prosecutor's office?
I did, on the matters of their investigation.
Did you defer to the detectives, the homicide detectives?
I did on the matters of their investigation.
Did you meet Bill Gillette? Do you remember who that was?
I do.
Is he a doctor to your knowledge?
He is not.
Did he have a strong grasp of the medical issues that were involved? To your understanding?
To my understanding, he did not.
Are you a doctor?
I am.
Did you have a grasp of the medical issues that were involved?
I did.
Objection.
I'll permit it. Let's move.
In these meetings with the prosecutors and the police, did you explain to them the medical issues involved?
I did. I spoke to them to the facts.
Are you an attorney, sir?
I am not.
Do you have any specialized experience with criminal law?
I do not.
Did you hire those around you that might?
I did.
Why?
because the complexity of the situation meant that we would be dealing with those issues, and we wanted
This is beyond the scope.
I disagree. I'll permit it.
This was objected to by the prosecutor and sustained, and now he's asking about it.
No, one part of it was you're correct, but I'll permit it.
Would you mind restating the question? I apologize.
Why?
Because there are aspects of the situation that were going to involve those parties, and we wanted to make sure we had the full understanding of that.
All right.
I would object to that.
All right, well, then we can approach.
Okay, let's approach then. Thought I'd get through a session. How was your soccer game this last weekend, Ms. Schaefer?
We got beat up.
Oh, well, I bet they're just dying to find out how badly they were beat up.
Showing you what I've marked for identification purposes as 27A. Look at that and see if you recognize that document.
I do.
What is that document?
That's an article in the Columbus Dispatch.
For the record, 27A is an article in the Dispatch from... What?
We have a 27A, make it B.
We'll make this 27B, Your Honor. My apologies. 27B, an article from February 22nd of 2019. Does that sound right?
Sounds right.
It references, quotes repeatedly, a Dr. Dan Roth, Executive Vice President and Chief Clinical Officer of Michigan-based Trinity Health. Who is that?
That is me.
And are you quoted by name and occupation in there?
I am.
So when you recall giving interviews with the media, did you do this anonymously, or I think the phrase was off the record, or were you identifying yourself and being quoted in those media releases?
I was identifying myself and being quoted in those.
And was this part of your effort and Trinity's effort to be transparent in this process?
It was.
Did you frame Dr. Husel for murder?
I did not.
Did you tell the county prosecutor to frame Dr. Husel for murder?
Objection, Judge.
This is right answering their question, Judge.
I'll permit it.
I did not.
Did you tell the homicide detectives that they had to frame Dr. Husel for murder?
Judge,
I did not.
My questions had nothing to do with framing anybody.
Okay, you may not use the framework.
And it's leading.
Overruled.
And it's leading.
It is leading. Rephrase.
Who, if anyone, did you tell the police to frame for murder out of the dosing habits of Dr. Husel in the nighttime ICU during palliative excavation?
Objection, Judge.
That was open as can be. Who, if anyone?
I know. It's overruled.
I did not tell anybody to do that.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Okay, you may step down. Thank you. Call your next witness.
Call Dr. Ralston to the stand.
We can at least get started with him. We got some time. You guys holding up okay? Did you flood him with sugar this morning again?
No.
Not yet? Okay. on down, doctor. I need you to go through the little obstacle course here.
Please remain standing and raise your right hand.
You raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but yourself, you got it?
I do.
Okay, you may get yourself comfortable. You can lower your mask if you're more comfortable. It's up to you. Okay? Okay, I need you to state your name for the record. You got that aerial mic there in front of you?
Okay.
State your name for the record and spell your name so that my court reporter can get used to your voice.
Sure. David Ralston, D-A-V-I-D, Ralston, R-A-L-S-T-O-N.
Can you all hear him?
Yes.
Madam Court Reporter? Okay, Mr. Zion.
Thank you. Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what it is you do for a living?
I am an ICU and pulmonary physician and sleep physician at Mount Carmel.
And how long have you been so employed?
Since 1997 with Mount Carmel.
What type of education, starting with college, did you need to do to become what you do today?
I went to college at Miami University. I then went to Ohio State Medical School. I then went into an internal medicine pediatric residency program for 4 years. And then I went to a fellowship in pulmonary critical care for 3 more years.
So that we could give you some so that you could give them some reference how long you've been doing that. What year did you graduate medical school?
1990, I'm sorry, 1990.
All right, and then you were an MD at that point?
Yes, sir.
Licensed to practice in the state of Ohio?
With limitations, being a resident, yes.
Okay, so 32 years ago?
Yes, I guess so, yes, sir.
Around 32 years you've been a doctor or graduated medical school? So what was your first residency in?
In 1990 through 94, I went into internal medicine pediatric residency, where I was eligible to be board certified in internal medicine and pediatrics.
And did you become board certified in either one of those areas?
I became board certified in internal medicine. I was wanting to be a family doctor, but then I fell in love with pulmonary and critical care medicine, so I did not become board certified in pediatrics.
Did you take any additional training or classes in critical care or pulmonary medicine?
After the residency, I had to do a 3-year fellowship in pulmonary and critical care medicine from 1994 through 1997.
Tell us what pulmonary care medicine, pulmonary, what does that word mean? What are we referring to when we say pulmonary?
Sure. It involves the treatment for patients with lung issues in general.
Okay. And critical care, pulmonary critical care. Describe to them what that involves, what a pulmonary critical care doctor does, and what you were trained to do.
Sure. A critical care physician is responsible for taking care of very sick patients in the ICU. Usually these patients are on the ventilator, and our role is to work with the patients to put them on life support, and then eventually try to get them off life support once their disease process is hopefully improved.
And you got that board certification in 1994?
I got that board certification, I think, in 1997.
You started in 94, I think you said.
Yeah, 94, yes.
Okay, so in 1997, what do you do once you're board certified in pulmonary critical care medicine?
I joined Mount Carmel at that point on their private practice group at that point.
Can you describe what that means and what you're doing on a daily basis then in 1997?
Sure. Basically, we would see, it would vary on a weekly basis. We'd have weekly rotations. I would work in the office for 1 week, seeing outpatients, patients with lung problems in the office. I would then rotate into the ICU for usually a week at a time. And then I would also see patients in the hospital on the floors with lung problems in general as well, too.
So you're taking care of people in like an office setting, like I have lung problems, I go to you, call up, make an appointment, and you look at me and you're examining at the office.
Yes, sir.
And then you're also seeing people in the ICU. Those would be generally people on ventilators.
Yes, in general, the very sick patients in general. Yes, sir.
But then you're also walking to the other floors that say, I'm not sick enough to be in the ICU, but I'm having breathing problems. They might call Dr. Ralston in to see what's up with my lungs.
Yes, sir, as a consultant.
Okay. So how long did you do that? That started in 97, so that's 25 years ago?
Yes, sir.
How long are you doing that?
I'm still doing that today. Yes, sir.
Okay, so you've done this for 25 years.
Yes, sir.
Now, just to be clear, are you an employee of the hospital itself?
I was not an employee initially. For several years, I was in private practice, but over the past, I think, it's about 5 years or so that, yes, I became part of the Mount Carmel Medical Group, which is the physician component of hospital physicians, basically.
Okay. And the company you work for, is it wholly owned by Mount Carmel then?
I'm not sure.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But you work for Mount Carmel, but you're not like exactly an employee of Mount Carmel. There's a company there.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And does your company manage the ICU?
We're consultants in the ICU, yes.
All right. And back in the relevant time frames, 2013 to 2018, what, if any, responsibilities did you have regarding the management of the intensive care unit at Mount Carmel West?
I was the medical ICU director at that point.
So tell the folks what the medical ICU director does and what your responsibilities were on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. Not necessarily a day-to-day basis, but it's more administrative in general. They would ask my opinion about a new ventilator of some sort, a new defibrillator to shock patients' hearts, to report to all the governing bodies, for example, issues with infections, secondary infections, things like that.
Okay. Did you have any other administrative duties as far as scheduling, things like that?
No. No, sir.
Okay. Tell us prior to 2013, what, if any, doctors were on the night shift at the ICU?
Sure. At the time, Mount Carmel was a teaching program, so we had young physicians in their internal medicine residency at that point. They were in training, and so they would be responsible for the care of the patients at night with myself and my partners readily available by phone if any issues, or even to come in if necessary.
Were you actually physically at the hospital, you or your partners?
No, sir.
And residents, those are the folks that have graduated medical school and are still training?
Yes, sir.
All right, so they're still kind of student doctors at this point?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So at some point, did that change regarding the coverage of the nighttime ICU?
Yes, the residency program at that point, because of some of the work hour shift in thinking, working hours, not wanting to work them too long, they decided not to provide ICU coverage at night with the residents at that point.
What, if any, change occurred to your knowledge?
At that point, you needed to have physicians at bedside at night, so therefore 2 physicians were hired to provide the nighttime ICU coverage.
Do you recall the names of those 2 physicians?
Sure. Dr. Husel and Dr. Hagris.
Is Dr. Hagris still part of this group working nights?
Yes, sir.
Were you part of that hiring process?
I talked to the physicians, but it was not ultimately my final say one way or the other.
And this was in 2013?
Yes, sir. By best recollection, yes, sir.
All right. Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what, if any, interactions you had with William Husel, one of the 2 that were hired, and or Dr. Hayes, just in general, and then any specific interactions you recall having when they began?
Your Honor, it's a compound question. If we could...
Agreed. Rephrase.
Did you have, what, if any, interactions did you have with Dr. Husel when he was hired?
When he was hired or after he was hired? I apologize.
Well, at that time, in 2013. I mean, did you walk through? Just tell them what you did.
When he was hired, I sat down with him. He told me his background. I told him what to expect with the job, basically. I'm sure I gave him a little tour of the ICU at that point. And that's kind of my interactions with him.
What about Dr. Haggis?
Objection is irrelevant.
I'll permit it.
It was probably the exact same thing that I did with Dr. Husel.
And they were hired about the same time?
By my recollection, yes, sir.
All right. And were they hired for a specific shift?
Yes, they were hired to work from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m.
All right. Did they split the week then?
Yes, they would get together and make their own schedules and things like that.
All right. So what were your hours and what were your partner's hours?
We really don't have shift work. We basically would show up around 8:30 in the morning, and then we would basically stay until all the work was done. Sometimes that would mean we had to stay because of some of the governing bodies' regulations, but sometimes it'd be an 8-hour day, some days it'd be a 12-hour day. You can't predict sometimes with the ICU.
Okay. And is, just so for the jury's reference, is Dr. Gianlupi one of your partners working day with you as well?
Yes, among others, yes.
Okay. So what, if any, interactions on a day-to-day basis between 2013 and 2018 did you have with either Dr. Husel or Dr. Haggis?
Objection, Your Honor, is to compound.
It's a two-part question.
Yeah, well, that's a very hard objection.
What interactions between 2013 and 2018 did you have with Dr. Haggis?
If I was there late, taking care of a sick patient, I would say, hey, there's this sick patient, keep your eye on tonight. Or if there was a patient expected from an outside hospital, say, hey, there's a patient coming in. It was professional sort of checkouts as much as possible. The residents would do the formal checkouts, but if I was there late, which I was fairly often, I would be focused on specific patients in general.
What about with Dr. Husel?
Very similar.
Did you have any interactions with Dr. Haggis outside of your professional relationship?
No, sir.
Did you have any interactions with Dr. Husel outside of your professional relationship?
No, sir.
Could you characterize how often you would have these interactions?
It would depend with Dr. Husel or Dr. Haggis.
Let's start with Dr. Haggis.
Okay. It would depend if, obviously we're on a rotation, so in the weeks in the ICU, I would have those interactions. On the weeks I'm not in the ICU, I would have 0 interactions.
What about Dr. Husel?
Yeah. Very similar.
All right. Were there ever any formal or informal team meetings that would be arranged with the 2 nighttime ICU doctors?
Yes, Dr. Swanner would have set meetings with them, and if I could attend, I would attend the meetings, which I think was a good thing.
What was the nature of these meetings? What in general would we discuss?
Basically, just to see how things are going at night. You don't want the night people to feel isolated or that they're not appreciated. Having a night ICU doc is precious. You want to make sure that they're happy. Otherwise, I would be the one working nights in general. So you want to make sure that they're happy. They may bring up issues that you didn't think about that occurs at nights and things like that.
Were any of these issues ever brought up to you by Dr. Husel?
No, sir.
What was Dr. Husel's training, to your understanding?
He was at the Cleveland Clinic and had done anesthesia as his critical care pathway.
Explain what that means, his pathway versus what?
Well, my pathway is internal medicine, so I did an internal medicine residency first, and then on top of that, I did the critical care component, a pulmonary critical care component on top of the internal medicine component. With there's several pathways you can become critical care certified. And the other way is through anesthesia, because they also deal with ventilators and things like that. So he did, I'm guessing, I don't have his CV in front of me, but he did, or his resume, he went through an anesthesia program and then did an additional year of training in critical care.
All right, so your pathway was internal medicine versus your understanding of Dr. Husel's pathway was anesthesia and then critical care.
Yes, sir.
And are there other pathways to become a critical care doctor?
I think there's also a surgical pathway. People who are surgeons can also do additional training and do surgical critical care. And even the neurosurgeons, I think, have a way to do neurocritical care, which is more specialized than just general critical care.
So there are several paths to do what you do.
Yes, sir.
All right. And you've done this since 1997. Do you know what Dr. Husel's prior experience in critical care was prior to him being hired in 2013?
No, sir. I thought he was just probably fresh out of his training. I thought, if I remember correctly.
All right. And are there any other doctors with Dr. Husel on a regular basis working his night shift with him?
Towards the end, I think we were incorporating some critical care nurse practitioners in general, but that would be about it.
Yes, but any other doctors, any other critical care doctors?
No, sir.
So that if there were questions on that shift, there were no other critical care doctors working with him?
That is correct, yes, sir.
And Hagris would be working the other part of the week?
Yeah, he would be rotating every other week. So one week it'd be Dr. Husel, the next week it'd be Dr. Hagris, unless they were on vacation or something.
If Dr. Hagris had any questions for you or for your team during the daytime, you having done this since 1997, could they have reached out to you at any point?
Yes, sir.
Could Dr. Husel, if he had any questions, being a new doctor to your understanding, reached out to you or to your team at any point with any questions or concerns? Could that have happened?
Yes, sir.
And to your memory, in the 5 years he was there, did that ever happen?
I don't recall that ever happened, no, sir.
So let's talk about palliative excavation. What does that term mean to you as a medical critical care doctor?
That means at that point you are removing life support and without plans of reinitiating that life support, and you still care about the patient, but your focus is more on comfort at that point.
All right. So that's what the palliative part means?
Yes, in general, yes. I use a different term, but...
What term do you use?
I use compassionate extubation is the term that I use.
So instead of palliative, you use the term compassion.
I think it's easier for the families to use and interact with the families. Palliative or terminal extubation is just harsh, I think, in general.
Sure. But the terminal extubation, terminal weaning, those are the same things?
A terminal extubation and terminal weaning is a little different. Terminal extubation is where you take the tube out of the mouth, while terminal weaning is where you just turn down the oxygen on the ventilator.
All right, so talk about specifically what's involved. So palliative means comfort care. We use the word compassion meaning comfort care. What's the extubation part mean? Explain to them what that physically involves, why that word is being used.
Could you repeat the question, I guess?
What does extubation mean?
Oh, I'm sorry. It means to physically take the breathing tube out of someone's trachea or windpipe, the big pipe in the lungs, and to take it out at that point.
Okay. And are there other times when you would extubate somebody besides in a palliative or compassionate setting?
Yes, sir. Hopefully when patients are better from pneumonia or when their lungs are damaged from smoking, and you can get them off the ventilator that way.
For people that you hope are going to live after you pull the tube out?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
So let's talk about a regular extubation. Mm-hmm. Someone's going to get better in your estimate and everyone's estimate. Mm-hmm. And it's decided medically to pull that tube out and get them off the ventilator, the machine breathing. What, if anything, is involved pain medication-wise in that process? In that process of we're going to continue on with their care.
You don't necessarily give pain medication at that point. You actually try to decrease the pain medications to a reasonable level so that they're awake enough to cooperate with you once the tube is out. That way the patient can cough and bring up secretions and help you with the extubation process.
Okay. What about benzodiazepines in a regular just extubation, not compassionate, not palliative? What about any benzodiazepines? Do you give them any benzodiazepines when it's expected that their care will continue and life-saving care will continue?
Your Honor, I think it's irrelevant as to what's done with those that are going to continue life-saving measures.
I'll permit it.
No, you would try to those are like Valium-like medicines that help relax you, so you would try to keep those at the lowest dose or discontinue those as well too.
So based on your training and experience, is the process of pulling that tube out, tell me where that tube is first. How's it get down there? Where is it? What's it doing down there?
Is placed through the mouth, between the vocal cords, and then put into the big pipe in the going to both lungs called the trachea, the big breathing tube right here.
Okay, so for the record, you're pointing to
to my chest, yes.
Yeah. And is that process, intubating someone, is that painful based on your training and experience?
It is uncomfortable. You do give medications to sedate the patient while you do that, because it's very normal to, I always make an analogy to families. It's like getting your throat swab for strep. You cough, you gag. It is uncomfortable to put the tube in. Yes, sir.
All right. What about pulling that tube out? What's your experience and your training tell you about the level of pain and or anxiety that involves?
Most patients are glad to have the tube out because they're very awake and alert. You will gag a little bit, but the ongoing stimulus of the coughing and gagging has been removed, and so it's very slightly uncomfortable, but it's not painful in my experience.
Mr. Zion, can I see counsel sidebar?
Yes, sir.
So, did you find out anything interesting about the jurors weekend?
We were talking about coaching.
It's one of her favorite hobbies. You ready there? Mr. Zion?
So let's talk about palliative extubations. That's when, as you explained, you're not expected, we're shifting to comfort care at this point. No further medical life-saving measures are going to be used, right?
Yes, sir.
In your experience, what is that process? Not talking about in general, talking about subjectively, your experience. What's the first thing you do?
It's a pretty lengthy process. You want me to go through?
Yes,
okay.
Well, first things first, Doc. Have you ever done one?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay. Now you can take off with it.
Thank you. How many do you think you've done?
Too many, I guess, with COVID, to be honest with you. Over my career, over 20 years, maybe 1,000 or so, and that I don't keep track. I don't know.
So you say it's a lengthy process. Start us at the beginning of this lengthy process.
Basically,
We'll get back here. I want you to speak up.
Sure. Basically, you want to make sure you have a very good relationship with the family. You want to sit down and talk to them, and when they hit the ICU, you really want to find out who can legally make these sort of decisions. Who's the decision maker is what I always call. Who's the decision maker? You want to establish a relationship with the family. They want to be able to trust you, and you want to relay trust and confidence to them as well too. And then at that point, You've been updating them every day. I make family rounds every day. You update the family. You talk to them. At that point, ultimately, sometimes the body says they're not going to make it, essentially. And you sit down with the family and you try to figure out what that loved one would want under these circumstances. The first transition is you try to eventually but discuss with family code status is the first thing.
Explain code status to the folks here.
Sure. There's 3 codes in the state of Ohio, 3 code levels, for lack of a better term. One, obviously, is a full code. As I always tell families, if you keel over, I'm trained to come running in, try to restart your heart with the best technology available, best skills available. Not guaranteed, but we try our best. The second is a DNR CC, which is Dnr Comfort Care arrest, which basically means we do everything up into the point where the heart stops. At that point, the heart stops. We don't go running in, shock the heart, beat on the chest, put tubes in the airways, things like that. Now, obviously, the third one is Dnr Comfort Care, where at that point, again, the care doesn't stop. You still care about the patient, but your focus shifts on comfort as a top priority. So the first thing you want to do is, at least as a family, is DNR CC arrest is usually the first step, because really this patient came in, usually it's a tragic event. The family's in shock, essentially. And so you want to give the family time to digest everything, talk about in-life issues as honestly and realistic as possible. And then after time, you sit down with the family and you say, the family will say, under circumstances, we don't want further aggressive interventions. And then they say, well, that sometimes means taking the tube out. And I try to go through that whole process of what that entails. And then I always like to have lots of ears in the room sometimes to listen. I like to get the bedside nurse in the room when I talk to the families and things. We have chaplain support that's always nice to have. And it is a process over time, but when the family reaches that, when I and the family the family is the patient advocate, I'm the patient advocate as well too. And at that point, if we decide somewhat together that it's time, then we start the process. We kind of pick a date and a time which is convenient for the family. We try to avoid holidays and birthdays and things like that. And then at that point, we would give medications to ease suffering and take the tube out with the family at bedside. I always like to be present, and then I like to always stop back by 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, to at least say, hey, how's things going, and talk to the family as well, too.
So you said it's a planned event?
Typically it is, yes, sir.
In your 1,000 or so, would you ever characterize any of them as emergencies?
No, sir.
Let's talk about the medicines you give. You said on a regular extubation, you try to decrease the benzos and the pain medication. On a palliative excavation, or in your words, a compassionate extubation, you said you give medicines. Mm-hmm. Tell them why you're giving them medicines at this point, and at what point are you doing it? Are you doing it before the tube comes out, after, etc.?
Sure. Based on the disease state of the patient, sometimes I give medicine ahead of time. I use morphine in my practice. That's what I use, morphine. I use a drug called Versed or midazolam it's a Valium sort of medicine. It's a relaxation medicine. The nice thing about it also has amnesia properties as well too. So it takes away memory of this. And this is after I've prepped the family pretty hard. Here's what to expect. Here's what could happen. Things like that.
What specifically are you preparing for? What are symptoms, etc.? Tell us.
Sure. I basically talk to the family that the medicines that I give act on the top part of the brain. That's the part of the brain that perceives pain and suffering. But the human body is an amazing thing. It really is an amazing thing. The body will fight to live even though the chemicals I'm giving affects the top part of the brain, so the patient's not perceiving pain, but the patient certainly may breathe fast, may have problems swallowing the spit from the back of the throat. Secretions is sort of the term for that. I always tell a family, you can be in the room when we take the breathing tube out. You can be outside the room and come right in. You can stay out in the waiting area, or you can be in the next county. I always say it's a personal threshold. We all have personal thresholds, and it's not a test of love to be in the room when this occurs.
Tell us about are there terms for that? Held your hand to your throat and said the rapid breathing. Is there a term for that?
Yeah, it's called agonal breathing, which may be either rapid, rapid, fast, shallow breathing, or it may be just intermittent gasp, intermittently, not a normal breathing pattern.
With the medications you give them ahead of time or at whatever time you think is appropriate that affect the top part of their brain, the benzos and the morphine, that guppy, agonal breathing, is it also sometimes called guppy breathing? Am I using the right term there?
Sure, the rapid, shallow breathing, yes, sir.
Okay. Is that in and of itself inherently painful or anxiety-inducing for the patient?
For the patient, no.
And is that why you prepare the family for that possible symptom of the dying process?
Right. I tell a family that we are going to do the best to relieve any suffering as much as possible. But again, the human body's, once you take the breathing tube out, the dying process is the dying process.
What about secretions? Is there any medicine you can get part of this planning process to help with the secretions? Is that also sometimes referred to as the death rattle? Yes,
it's the noise in the back of the throat. Typically, we can give drying of secretions. Atropine is a commonly drug that's used. There's other medications. And you basically try to give that ahead of time a little bit as well, too. Sometimes it's very successful. Sometimes it's not as successful as I would want.
Now, when someone is intubated on the ventilator and before the DNR, CCA, or CC decision is made, do you ever give patients paralytics?
When a patient's on the ventilator? Yes, sir.
And what would be the purpose, what is the purpose of paralytics? And then first explain what are paralytics and what would be the purpose of giving them to them?
When you're paralyzed, I always make the analogy, it's like when you're going for surgery. You can't move. You don't want the surgeon cutting on something that's moving or anything, so you are actually not able to move. There's chemicals that prevent you from moving. When you're paralyzed with a ventilator, that basically means we are taking total control of your breathing at that point. And that improves at times. The lungs' job is to do two things. One is to get in oxygen. The other is to get rid of the waste product, which is the carbon dioxide. And so therefore, the lungs, the paralytic, when we take over total control of the breathing, the goal is to improve oxygenation and ventilation with the ventilator.
What, if anything, is part of this sometimes long process with preparation for palliative excavation, compassionate excavation, do you do in regards to paralytics that a patient might be on?
It's extremely important to make sure that the paralytics have been cleared from the bloodstream.
Why is that extremely important?
Okay, hold on, doctor. That's in your practice? That's in your practice?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yes, and all of this, if I say anything,
right,
ask you to opine about something that's not, I'm talking about your practice, your experience.
Sure, and I guess I should phrase, in my practice, I guess, you have to stop it ahead of time because you don't want to take the tube out and then the patient not making any effort of breathing because that's not ethically the right thing to do.
Why not?
Objection, Your Honor, is what's ethically appropriate.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, ethics aside, in your experience, in your practice, what would happen to a person on paralytics if they're still on paralytics when you take them off the breathing machine?
Well, it deprives me of two things. One is the ability to assess how much pain and discomfort they are in because they can't respond to any stimuli. And it basically would not allow them to breathe even once you take the tube out.
the purpose was so they could die. What difference does that make?
Okay, sustain.
And move to strike.
And strike. Disregard the question.
How long does it take paralytics to wear off?
It depends on the disease process, how much liver disease, how much renal disease is present, the type of paralytics that you use. It varies, and you have to check for it before you take the breathing tube out, that it's cleared.
Okay. How do you check for it?
You do what's called a train of 4. Fancy term, train, like a choo-choo train, but you put things to stimulate the muscles, and it puts a little electrical shock, not painful or anything. I do that to the residents to show them, but it basically makes you, if you give a little electrical shock, your hand will twitch, and you want to see all 4 twitches. If you give the shock and it doesn't twitch, that means that they're still paralyzed at that point.
And how do the paralytics clear the system?
Usually by either coming out in your urine, you're renally excreted, or cleared by the function of the liver.
So they just come out of that, it's just a matter of time?
Yes, sir.
And as part of this planned procedure, you have that time?
Yes, sir. And you prep the family ahead of time to tell them you would have to make sure the paralytic is cleared.
All right. Let's talk about the medicines you use as part of the palliative or compassionate excavation in your experience. What would you generally start with, and the doses you would use?
Sure. Obviously, every patient is unique and different. Sometimes I would give the pain medications before the excavation, sometimes afterwards, but typically I use 2, maybe 4 milligrams of morphine and 2 of Versed.
All right. And do you use those at the same time?
Yes, sir.
And clinically in your practice, do you do that before extubation, during extubation, or after extubation?
Again, it's very patient-specific. Some patients, I feel comfortable with their disease process. I do not have to give it before extubation. If I do, I try to give it 10 minutes or so before to allow it to kick in or to be effective. And then afterwards, we would give it based on as-needed basis, called PRN, as-needed basis. And then we can give more smaller doses as necessary in that process.
Is there any danger in giving too big of a dose based on your training and experience and your practice?
Objection, Your Honor.
Okay, it's a great time to go to lunch. Ladies and gentlemen, the guy is here to supposedly fix the system. So let's come back at 1:15. Almost still only 15 minutes to make up for whoever was stuck in the traffic jam this morning. I heard it was horrible. Okay? I'm the one who gets to sit, I guess. I should stand. You guys have a great lunch.